This week on World Traveler Cooking, we're going to cover what is perhaps one of the most unusual pasta dishes in Italy. I'm talking about a dish from Puglia called spaghetti all'assassina. Now, this is quite an unusual dish. It started in, I think, around the 1960s with some people who had found a much older recipe. So in some forms it probably goes significantly further back. Eventually it became kind of popular as a way of using leftover pasta sauce. We'll talk about that a little bit. You can take a little bit of any pasta sauce you like that you have a little bit extra of, and you can throw it in this dish at the beginning to make a really delightful dish. Now, what makes this dish particularly unusual is that it's probably the only dish I know of that's very similar to the idea of a one-pot pasta in Italy. Italians don't typically like to cook pasta this way, except perhaps in soups. And consequently, this dish is quite unusual in Italian cuisine, but on top of that, it's not very much like a normal one-pot pasta that American or British cooks may be familiar with, in the sense that the methodology is quite different. So this is not a typical pasta, pretty much in any way. So I'm going to go into the ingredients. We have olive oil, a significant amount. I'm going to use half of one of these packages of spaghetti, and it's really important to try to choose a good quality spaghetti. If you don't choose a great quality spaghetti, it'll still come out okay, but here, this is a dish where the quality of the spaghetti makes a big difference. So I've chosen, it's good to go for like a slow-dried spaghetti, so something that you can tell partly from the color. You want a color that's lighter, maybe more yellow, and definitely not orange. And you can also look at the cooking time, and you can tell this one takes 12 minutes to cook, which is fairly long for most off-the-shelf spaghetti. And so basically that's going to help this release more starch as we cook it. As you'll start to see, the starch becomes really important in the final product. For half of a pack of this, I have almost 400 milliliters of tomato puree. This is one from Puglia, which is where this dish is from, so I thought that was kind of cool and thought I'd use it. You don't have to use ones from Puglia. Obviously, from Italy are better than elsewhere. They tend to not have as much of a sour taste because in Italy they tend to cook these for a very long time in the bottle. But that's not here or there. The tomato will get cooked quite well in any case, and so you shouldn't worry about that too much. I have, similar to 3 large cloves of garlic. Sometimes I add a little more. It's worth noting that most recipes suggest chopping one of the cloves or 2 of the cloves. I don't do that. And as a result, I get a little less garlic flavor in the final sauce. So sometimes I compensate by adding a little more. When I do one on aglio e olio, I'll talk about that difference a little more because I use a significantly larger amount of garlic, but that's compensation for how I cook it. A chili pepper is a nice addition. This is a relatively spicy one. You can also use just 1 cayenne pepper or something. However spicy you like it. If you have a little bit of leftover pasta sauce, take out a few tablespoons of that. Maybe a 1/4 cup, 50 milliliters, that sort of thing. And that's all of our ingredients. So let's go ahead and get started. As I say, this is a totally different dish than you're probably used to seeing. And there's one final note here. In terms of cooking pans, you can use a non-stick. I don't recommend it. So I recommend, if you're in the US, going out and getting a nice cast iron frying pan. You can usually find those at thrift stores for not very much. and you probably want a metal spatula in that case. If you insist on doing this in a non-stick pan, then my recommendation is don't try to fry and char the bottom of the pasta like I'll do today. Just try to dry it out slowly, and that should be good enough. Finally, the other kind of pan that's really good to use for this is like a Lyonnaise carbon steel frying pan. Sometimes you can find decent ones of those places. They're not that expensive, and I recommend having some of these dishes around any time just because they're more versatile than non-stick. So I'm actually going to use a large cast iron enameled and anodized pan, and that'll work fine. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is pour a generous amount of olive oil into here. I would say, 2 to 3 tablespoons. And into the olive oil, even on a cold pan, we are going to add our whole garlic and our chopped chili pepper. Then I'm going to turn this onto a medium heat, and then we'll prepare the broth. You know, I said broth, and you're thinking that's kind of funny for a pasta. So I'll go into that and make that point clear. So for the broth, I'm going to start by dumping in my tomato puree. And then I'm going to fill this to about the halfway point with water and shake this up. See? And then I'm going to fill it the rest of the way. I'm going to pour that in. I'm going to add maybe a teaspoon or so of salt. And bring this to a boil. And then once this boils, I'll turn it down. So I'm going to cook these garlic cloves through on this about medium heat. And I'm going to slowly break them down. So once they've cooked a bit, you can just cut them into pieces with your spatula. And a wooden spatula here works really well for smashing them. We want to eventually kind of smash and mash the garlic in a little bit. So, yeah, we can... And then basically, once this is all mashed, then I'm going to add some of the tomato broth, and I'm going to let that just kind of thicken and absorb the oil and deglaze the chili peppers off the bottom of the pan. So, my broth is getting hot. It's not quite boiled, but my garlic's starting to brown. Most of the Italian recipes say go ahead and let the garlic brown a bit. But you don't want to let it brown too much or else it'll get really bitter. So I'm going to just take a ladleful of the sauce, of the broth, and I'm just going to stir it in. Then I'm going to add my pasta. So you can let the sauce reduce a little bit before you add your pasta. What you say, you haven't cooked the pasta yet? This is the only Italian dish I know that tends to put the pasta in the sauce before cooking it. Now, you don't have to do this, but I like to add a little white wine right here. So I have a little bit of my Allure Pinot Grigio, and I'm just going to stir that in. Let that come to a boil, and then I'm going to try to work these work the pieces of pasta apart from each other. This is actually something of a challenging dish to cook, just because the pasta at various points can feel like it's sticking together, and you always get the sense right until the end that you're cooking a big disaster, but then it comes out okay. So if at any point it just feels like it's wrong, keep trying and wait until it comes out at the end and see how it is at that point. But you can see right now that this pasta is starting to separate. And so we're going to stir this until the sauce disappears at the bottom, this broth disappears at the bottom. Then we'll ladle in a little more. And we will probably turn up the stove at that point. Now, traditionally, this is a pasta that's eaten without cheese. It's also traditionally kind of it can be a vegan pasta. It doesn't have to be. I mean, you could, if you had your other tomato sauce, you would have added it there instead of the broth. And that could, for example, even be like a bolognese or something. So you can see we're almost out of broth, and things are getting a little starchy. So in a few moments, I'm going to have to start adding more. And I usually start with a wooden spatula, but eventually I'll switch to a metal spatula. Obviously, you can't do that with a nonstick pan. So, doesn't that look appetizing? Alright, I'm going to add a bit more. I'm going to turn the heat up to a medium high, and I'm just going to keep stirring. I'll be back when I'm mostly out of broth. I'm just going to keep doing this like a risotto until I'm more or less out of broth. And look at how that sauce just slowly turns into this really rich orange sauce. And add more sauce now. I'm getting close to the end of my sauce. Adding more sauce. You note that this is cooked similar to risotto, but it's using spaghetti instead of rice. So oddly, as strange as this is, it still fits very well within sort of established Italian techniques. So when I get the rest of the sauce added, which will probably be another couple minutes, then I'm going to turn up the heat, and we're actually going to kind of burn the sauce a little bit on purpose. Oh, look at that. That's what we're shooting for. That little bit of charring on there, but not too much. A little bit more and we'll be done. So, plating of this is typically a fairly simple affair. You typically don't top it with cheese or parsley or anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to twirl a few mounds on top of each other. And make a nice heap of the pasta. So there we have our spaghetti all'assassina. And now for the taste test. This is absolutely delicious. You get the spiciness from the chili pepper, the tanginess from the wine, the tomatoey flavor. The only flavor that you don't really taste is the garlic, but that's okay. This is amazing. It's well worth the effort to master it. Now, if you find this content interesting, I hope I've earned a like and a subscription from you. And please click on the subscription drop down and select the notification bell so that you can find out when I'm releasing new videos. And I always appreciate comments on these videos. I know most people prefer to comment just that they like the dish. I also like to see people comment and say what they would do differently, because that adds a lot of value to somebody who might come to this video looking for information on how to make a particular dish. So, having said that, recipes in the description. Bon appetit, and see you next week.